Hallo? Hallo? Ja, værsgo at komme ind og tage plads. Vi starter om 1 minut. And before we get started, I'll start with a little bit embarrassing practical information. But I know most of you come from the airport right away, so please switch off your mobile phones during takeoff and landing, and not just switch it off, but switch off the network if you can, because we are a little bit short of network capacity, and we would like to save that for the Skype we have later, and also for the online streaming. But that was the only practical information I have to give you. My name is Henrik Brandt. I'm the director for Play the Game and the Danish Institute for Sports Studies. We will have during the week almost 400 delegates from, last time I counted, 45 countries. and we have more than 165 presentations on the main topics of the conference. You can see all the information about the conference in the conference guide that is a part of your delegate kit. As you will discover during this opening session and during the whole week, there's a lot to talk about, and we are really honored that so many of you have found that the Play the Game conference is the major challenges of international sport. And for those who could not be here, we stream the sessions, so you can follow us on our website, playthegame.org, and welcome to people who will be watching us right now. I can assure you that we have done everything to make you feel well accommodated here in Aarhus while we discuss the homeless. Westo, actually a member of the board of Aarhus 2017, the European Capital of Culture, who has made this event in this city hall possible.
Thank you, Henrik. Dear President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, dear Minister of Culture, dear Lord Mayor, dear speakers, and dear delegates, dear sponsors and partners, and all of you dear guests at this opening session of the 9th World Communication Conference on Sport and Society Play the Game 2015. At Play the Game and the Danish Institute for Sports Studies, we are delighted to be back in Aarhus for the second time after the successful conference here in 2013. We are even more delighted to be able to officially open this conference in this beautiful city hall of the city of Aarhus, and to host the public opening session in partnership with Aarhus 2017, the European Capital of Culture, as a part of the special initiative for strengthening public debate on issues of societal relevance. A strong public debate is exactly one of the cornerstones in a true democracy. It's certainly also one of the cornerstones which Danish society as a whole is built on. Actually, the Play the Game initiative has grown out of a good tradition through 150 years in Danish society and in Danish sport of voicing your opinion and fighting for your objectives and values in a democratic spirit. At Play the Game, the Danish Institute for Sports Studies, we strongly believe that an informed public debate based on independent analysis and involvement of all stakeholders is the way forward in a common search for a better solution or more effective sports organizations. Over the years, we and some of you, your speakers and delegates here today, and others, and the Play the Game conferences have been perceived to be controversial, to be sensationalists or even bad company for true leaders in sport. We were the outsiders. We were the empty barrels, could you say, that made a lot of noise without really understanding all the good things in sports were said about us. The fact that we hold this conference with such fantastic representation among the speakers and delegates from official ministries, institutions and authorities, from leading media houses and even from brave leaders and officials from the sports world, are actually the best sign that things really have changed. The open and democratic discussions on corruption and mismanagement in international sports organization, the same open discussions on major threats to sports such as doping, to discussions on match fixing, and to discussions on unsustainable mega events, and also the same kind of discussions on lack of ability of parts of the organized sports world to contribute enough to combat the growing threat of physical inactivity among ordinary people. All these discussions have now certainly become mainstream discussions in the sport and political debate among international, European, national and also local institutions and authorities. Play the Game has moved from being considered as an assembly of provocateurs and political extremists in the sports world into being a valued partner and a valued forum for discussion, what also you heard Henrik call the homeless questions in sport, as we put it in our institute. More and more stakeholders agree with us that an informed public debate on challenges and potentials of sport based on independent analysis and involvement of all stakeholders is not an evil thing, but it's necessary to bring sport forward. Even the international sports federations who have resisted good advice from the outside world for too long are now expressing a need for change, a need for reforms if organized sport and the established sports organizations are to maintain their role as a positive force in the society. The task we now face to keep up the pressure is to keep up the pressure and to convert all the good intention into action so that it's not only words. If you look at the impressive list of sponsors from Danish sport organizations, from media organizations and international, local and regional partners that are represented on the list of partners and sponsors in our official program on your seats, it becomes clear that Play the Game is not alone. First of all, we are not alone because you have decided to come here today and to participate in the conference. We are grateful that you spent your valuable time, your talent and other resources in helping us to develop a democratic debate in sport. Your support is a huge importance to the conference and to the work of Play the Game. Thank you very much for that. Today we launch the result of the International Sports Governance Observer research on the good governance structures in the 35 international sports federation with Olympic status. Yes, there is certainly room for improvement, but the report also contains useful tools and concrete advice of how to move forward to more efficient and democratic international sports organizations in the future. We have come a long way in putting the most important issues in international sports on the agenda. We have far from reached the target that it comes to finding the right solutions yet. That is why I can assure you that even though Play the Game's values your support and recognition of our work, it will not prevent us from keeping on with asking the homeless and sometimes unpleasant questions even in the future. I'm not going to take any more of your time. We have a fantastic program, I think, covering some of the most important topics in the international sport ahead of us. Once again, thank you to Aarhus 27 and the city of Aarhus, to our official guests and speakers, to the partners and delegates for being here and for contributing to the conference. And thank you to the rest of the audience today for taking part of this official opening. I also want to thank the staff and volunteers of Play the Game for their commitment in creating this conference. You are all doing a fantastic job helping. Thank you especially Jens, Maria, Stine, Søren, of course, with Henrik in also, and everybody else from the staff. And now, I wish you all a successful and fruitful experience on the Play the Game conference Thank you and good luck. Thank you.
Yes, as I said, the world will be watching, as you can see it up there. May-Britt, who is watching, no, she is not, but we dare not switch Skype off because we are going to use it later, so we will leave May-Britt there. The Danish Institute for Sport Study and Play the Game is an independent institution under the Danish Minister of Culture. Half of our funding approximately comes from the basic grant that we get through the National Lottery. And with the new Lottery Act came in force this year, we now receive a fixed share of the proceeds from the lottery. That means that for the first time, the Play the Game initiative has a true permanent status. And we hope that the recent developments in international sport has confirmed that there is a need for such a watchdog. So I think it will be a good gesture to now give the floor to the person in charge of our Ministry of Culture, which is also the Ministry of Sport. We are very honored that our Minister of Culture, since this summer, Bertel Haarder, has accepted our invitation to come to this conference. Bertel Haarder is one of the most experienced politicians in Denmark. He has held positions in various governments for many, many years in various ministries, and he's also very familiar with the tradition of Danish sport and the voluntary sector. So, Bertel Haarder, please take the floor.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. President, Mrs. President of the Council of Europe Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, the Olympic oath is very clear, and I quote, "We swear that we are taking part in the Olympic Games as loyal competitors, observing the rules governing the Games, and anxious to show a spirit of chivalry for the honor of our countries and for the glory of our sport," unquote. Those were the words of the first Olympic oath, spoken by the Belgian fencer, Victor Doyen, at the 1920 Olympic Games in Antwerp. The wording has changed from game to game, but the essence of the oath remains the same. Doyen was not just Mr. Anybody. Besides winning a silver medal in fencing in Antwerp in 1920, he also won medals in water polo, silver in 2008 in London and bronze in 1912 in Stockholm. So he was an all-round sportsman. He also competed in swimming at the Olympics and was acting in ice skating, ice hockey, motorcycle racing, and according to my manuscript, also flying. That must have been svæveflyvning. And being a sports journalist, he co-founded the International Sports Journalists Association. Well, since then, specialization and magnification has turned the world of sports into a huge labyrinth, a Babylon, with less cohesion, less oversight and transparency. Still, it's very important that sport is an arena of unity and solidarity. We meet our competitors as friends, whether they are from allied countries or from enemy countries. You can compare with the famous Christmas truce in 1914, when German and British soldiers came out of the trenches to play football against each other during the Christmas days. We meet on common grounds for a friendly battle. Sport has the power to break down discrimination and racial division, as during the 1995 Rugby World Cup in South Africa. As Nelson Mandela said, sports laughs in the face of all types of discrimination. For this reason, the Olympic oath remains relevant today as a powerful moral code, as it talks about loyal competitors observing the rules, spirit of chivalry for the honor of our countries and for the glory of sport, as I quoted from the first Olympic oath. It may nowadays sound a bit outdated, but it's nonetheless an expression of honesty, loyalty, honor, and glory. We have, and we must have, high expectations when it comes to our athletes. We expect them to follow the rules, to play fair. We expect them to say no to doping and say something if they see something. That was the motto for the Danish match-fixing campaign. We expect them to show team spirit and good sportsmanship. We expect the athlete to take the moral high ground. We expect them to be exemplary role models and good ambassadors for our countries and for their sports. And since no one is perfect, and that certainly is true for political and other leaders, therefore there must be transparency in order that the public can control what we are doing to the resources that we are dealing with. And in that respect, it's a bit depressing to read today's Danish newspapers, where there's a very interesting description of a brand new report from the Sports Governance Observer, headed by Henrik Brandt. It says in this report that none of the 25 Olympic federations are transparent. They have no term limits on elected leaders. They have no public information on account and activities. They have no integrity checks of their leaders. They have no insight into salaries and perks and bonuses, fringe benefits. They have no effective internal control mechanism such as independent ethics and audit committees. And it all adds up to that although 6 years has passed after the basic universal principles of good governance of the Olympics and sports movement, very little has happened. That is quite revealing. In speeches, most leaders in the world of sports share the expectations to the athletes. They cannot accept corruption of an athlete, and we should not accept it. In the words of the leadership guru, John C. Maxwell, and I quote, "The leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way," unquote. How can we expect athletes to say no to doping when we hear the stories of leaders of the sports organizations and of governments covering up doping cases? How can we expect the athletes to refrain from match fixing and corruption on the field when the leaders are arrested for corruption in the boardroom? How can we expect the athletes to report whereabouts and undergo financial scrutiny when the sports organizations can be criticized for lack of financial and democratic transparency and for the lack of good governance? The leaders must necessarily take the lead, also when it comes to the moral high ground. Before each Olympic game, the members of the UN declare a world truce to signal that sport has the power to make us look aside from our differences and disagreements. Because of this great power of sport, the world of sports, and in particular the sports movement, has an obligation to set forth a good example. If not, the sports movement risks losing its relevance and importance. We need a strong sports movement with an even stronger morale and integrity. The integrity of sports and the moral of its leaders are fundamental for the well-being of sports. Why? Well, to put it in the words of Leo Tolstoy in one of his grand novels, War and Peace, and I quote, "How can one be well when one is in moral suffering?" Unquote. I will leave that quotation in the air while I wish you a good conference and thank each and every one of you for spending days in Aarhus with this crucial subject that has to do with the respect of the public and of politicians, of parents and youngsters. It is crucial that this conference not only ends up with words, but also action. And we, the Ministers for Culture, of course, could be part of the action, but we can certainly not do it alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. And we boast so much about our democratic tradition, so I wouldn't be afraid to say that I disagreed with you, but the fact is I did agree with you on everything except that you gave me all the credit for the Sports Governance Observer report. I'm afraid that might cost me a few rounds in the bar among the staff members who also contributed and the partners we had, but I will have receipts for those beers, so we have good governance. Next speaker is a local one. It is not a secret that over the years many places and institutions in the sports world have taken some efforts in avoiding hosting the Play the Game conferences due to our reputation of asking sometimes unpleasant questions in sport. Aarhus was not among these places. On the contrary, this city has been the daily home of the Play the Game offices for many years, and we have always felt a warm and enthusiastic support and commitment from the city. Also when we located the conference here in 2013 and again now in 2015. And the Lord Mayor of Aarhus, Bundsgaard, has a personal commitment and interest in sport himself, and we are therefore very honored that he has accepted our invitation to come and say welcome to his city.
Thank you. And first of all, a very, very warm welcome to the city of Aarhus. You might have experienced one of our mottos. We are the wind turbine city of the world. It's a bit windy these days. As Mayor of Aarhus, it gives me great pleasure to be able to welcome you here, and especially welcome to City Hall. This wonderful building that was inaugurated in 1941 and designed by two famous Danish architects, Arne Jacobsen and Erik Møller. And the reason why it's very fitting to start off the conference here is because this building is built as an open house, a transparent house. If you look at city halls all across the world, from especially before the Second World War, but also after, most of them are built as forts, as castles. This is built as an open house with big windows and a lot of light, and that's because we want our democracy to be open and transparent, as well as we want our sporting organizations to be. We're always proud to welcome a guest to the city. The city of Aarhus is the second largest city in Denmark. We have about 55,000 students in higher education, and we have a very, very lively sporting community here in the city, and therefore we're always glad to welcoming especially sporting organizations to the city. And we're very proud that Play the Game and the Danish Institute for Sport Studies have their home here. This is something that we really, really treasure, because their mission is also our mission. And I mean, it's almost too obvious to say, but it's definitely no secret that this year's conference is taking place in the light, or perhaps actually in the shadow of the scandal that has been unfolding during the weeks and months of this year in FIFA. And seen from Denmark, a country with a quite solid and deep-rooted tradition of democracy and openness in sporting organizations, it is very disheartening and frustrating to witness how corruption and bad management are not only causing a crisis in this organization, but also damaging the image of football, and also threatening the sport's unique ability to bring people together, to bring people from all walks of life, from all nations together in the common goal of fair competition. And sports, and perhaps especially football, which is one of the sports that's my heart very near, has the wonderful ability to bring people together. I mean, nothing else but sports are able to break down the barriers in the way that sports can do. So it hurts every fiber of my body when I see, and when we see this mismanagement of leadership in sporting organizations. There is a need for a democratic spring in some of these organizations. And as I said, this makes this conference very, very relevant, and perhaps more relevant than ever before. And it's a timely reminder of the importance of coming together to discuss these difficult issues of corruption, doping, match fixing, and a need for also the general population in every country to be involved in the sporting activities. So as politicians, as journalists and scientists and opinion makers, we all have a great responsibility to safeguard the values of sports, including democracy and openness, and to ensure that this wonderful and fantastic world of sport is open to citizens of all ages, and not least to the many girls and boys all over the world who find this their idols, their motivation among the heroes and heroines of the sporting world. The ideal of fair play in sports is extremely important. It's an extremely important set of values that all athletes and organizations of sports of influence and time, energy to strengthen sports community and democracy. Very proud to be able to host it. I hope you have a wonderful conference. Also a very good time here in Aarhus, that you also get the opportunity to see a little bit of our beautiful city. We have very wonderful conference facilities, but I mean the city is really, really nice, so hope you get time to experience it. So by this, I would like to conclude. Once again, welcome to Aarhus. I hope that many of you are inspired here and perhaps also inspired to come back in 2017 will be European Capital of Culture, and sports is a central part of that as well. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Our next speaker is also a person who has commitment to sport. From 1999 till 2004, Anne Brasseur was Minister for National Education, Vocational Training and Sport. In 2014, she has been the President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, which is a one-year renewable term. Since 2007, the European Council has had a so-called enlarged partial agreement on sport called EPAS in order to facilitate pan-European sports cooperation. EPAS shares the objective of play the game in facing and discussing the challenges facing sport in Europe, and that's why we are very grateful that for this conference we have a very good partnership with EPAS, which has allowed us to get representations from a lot of European countries that we usually do not have present at our conference. So I will now give the floor to Anne Brasseur.
Minister, Mayor, Chair, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having asked the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe to join you in this very important meeting. If I speak about the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, I just want to remind that the Council of Europe has 47 countries, member countries. At the Parliamentary Assembly we are 324 members, national parliamentarians from those 47 member states. So it's the large geographical Europe we are covering, so it goes far beyond the reach out of the EU. The topics you are discussing in this conference are also of great relevance to the Council of Europe. And the Council of Europe developed legal instruments and policy guidelines which promotes the Council of Europe's values such as human rights, the rule of law and democracy. In the field of sports, of course, because the sports is not only about physical activity, it's also about values. We did not only develop a normative framework of our member states, we also monitor and support its implementation, for instance, with advisory visits and projects carried on with sports organizations and other sport stakeholders. In my speech, I will focus on 5 points. First, anti-doping. The Council of Europe Convention on Anti-Doping aims to ensure fair play and protects the health and well-being of athletes, a topic which will be brought to the fore during this conference as well. Talking about the well-being of athletes, I have the pleasure the Council of Europe's enlarged partial on sport. You just more specific and the fight made a number of among young people about the risks of doping and help them to develop a sporting culture based on respect for values and sports ethics and not on winning at all costs. End of quote. Second point, match fixing. Match fixing is possibly the greatest threat to the integrity of professional sport at this moment. Our new convention on match fixing, opened for signature only 13 months ago in September 2014 in Switzerland, is a response to that threat. I had the opportunity of being a rapporteur on the report on match fixing, and I was glad that we could conclude and could come to a convention. In the meantime, 2 countries have already ratified it and 19 others have signed it. I would like to congratulate Norway and Portugal, which are paving the way for a quick entry into force of the Convention, and to invite all other countries, Mr. Minister, I'm looking at you as well, including also non-Europeans, if they are represented here, to take steps towards the ratification of this unique instrument. Last week I was in Lausanne at the IOC, and also the IOC is promoting this very important convention on match fixing. Match fixing is a very complex problem, and any solution will need to involve all the interested stakeholders to protect the integrity, the beauty of the game. In the fight against match fixing, we have to work hand in hand with the sport movement, betting operators, law enforcement agencies, gambling regulators, and public authorities. And we should seek to bring into the system not only all the Council of Europe member states, but also as many other countries as possible. This is a fight that we can only win together. Therefore, I'm very happy to inform you that the European Commission and the Council of Europe will join forces in the fight against match fixing. As of January 2016, the Council of Europe will implement the project Keep Crime Out of Sport, together against criminal manipulations of sports competitions, which will be funded by the DG Home of the European Commission. This project aims to support capacity building in the member states to successfully fight against match-fixing practices. Third point, spectator violence. Presently, the Spectator Violence Convention, which was launched in 1985, is being revised and updated. The revision of this legal instrument aims at promoting an integrated multi-agency approach in the areas of safety, security, and service. Since the existing of the Convention, many important recommendations were adopted. It was agreed to merge these recommendations into a consolidated version which will offer practical advice on developing national responses to challenges posed by the rise of violence at sport events. It will help signatory states to establish effective partnership between all relevant stakeholders, such as governments, local authorities, the police, and sports organizations, and draw their attention to the relevant good practices from across Europe. The relevant committee of the Parliamentary Assembly delivered a positive assessment on the draft convention, and I am certain that our final opinion will strongly support the ratification of this new instrument. While asking spectators to behave properly, let's not forget that those in charge should be exemplary and should set the example. This, unfortunately, is far from being the case. Speaking of setting the example brings me to my next point, the fourth point, good governance. Good governance is yet another topic hotly discussed currently. The Council of Europe has conducted important work in this field and shaped the discussions in Europe in this regard with its recommendations on the principles of good governance in sports in 2005 and the Code of Sport Ethics, which was revised in 2010. Tomorrow, Stanislas Frossard of the EPAS, he's the Executive Secretary of the EPAS, will present to you the results of the Good Governance Survey we implemented among the EPAS member states. Furthermore, there is a session on what national governments can do for sports governance. So I hope that a lot of you are going to attend this. And this workshop is co-organized by EPAS. I expect the discussions to be very interesting, and I'd like to invite you to consider attending this workshop, as representatives of public authorities responsible for sport will also be there. Let me say this is an area which was addressed twice by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe in the last 3 years, in particular, but not exclusively, with reference to football. At the time of the adoption of the Assembly's resolution in 2012, Good Governance and Ethics in Sports, and a resolution in 2015, the reform of football governance, we faced skepticism and protests from FIFA. I went to see the responsibles of FIFA, and they said that they had everything in place, ethics committees, compliance committees, and also reform projects. But as we see now, nothing happens. Today, I'm sorry to note that the reality is worse than what we pointed out in our reports. I'm attached to the autonomy of the sports movement, but I just refuse the idea that some leaders of major sports organizations could act as monarchs who rule outside the rule of law and abuse of powers and resources which are entrusted to them. Transparency and accountability shall be there. And if self-regulation cannot ensure it, this is a problem that public authorities will have to solve. This is an issue of public interest and not just a highly lucrative private business. As I recently stated, in football, a player gets a yellow card as a warning and then a red card and is sent off. FIFA has been stacking up the yellow cards for too long. Now it is time for red. Simply replacing individuals will not solve the problem. It is time to blow the final whistle on it. Game over. My last point is no hate. The No Hate Parliamentary Alliance, launched by the Assembly last January, brings together parliamentarians in the member states who pledge to adopt firm and proactive public positions against racism, hatred, and intolerance. I would like this alliance to be extended to other international bodies such as the European Parliament or the Interparliamentary Union, as well as to get moral support from the voluntary sector, also from sports and from religious leaders. A number of leading personalities have already publicly supported our alliance, and I was honored that His Holiness Pope Francis is amongst the supporters of our No Hate Parliamentary Alliance. Sports holds an important place in our society. It creates the potential for thousands of sports people to become role models for youth and nations to feel proud for their sports people's achievements in transnational championships. It is also potentially a powerful vehicle to transmit the values of fairness, respect for others, and inclusion, and would therefore be a most valuable supporter to extend our No Hate campaign. And at my meeting at the IOC, the Director General of the IOC, as well as the compliance officer, they support as well our movement. We have a responsibility to join forces, despite our religious, cultural, national or historical differences, to defend the values of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. And that's why it's so important that the sports movement is going to join it. And at the end of my speech, I will hand out a button to the minister, to the mayor, to the chair, and to the organizers with no hate on it. And please, I would be glad if you all could join this movement of no hate. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by saying that we are very happy to support this conference. I look forward to the discussions and to the contributions that the distinguished speakers and the audience will bring to the debate. We have to stand together for healthy sport, not only out there in the field, but also in governance of sports. As the chair said in his opening speech, not only words, but action, and that was taken over by the minister as well. So not only words, but action. So let's play the game together. Mange tak.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's take a picture with it.
Okay.
It's going to be in my campaign.
How do I put it on? Whoops, down there. Next time it will be a meadow. It is.
I'm sorry, so just...
No, okay. I'll hold it up. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm giving you this. Thank you.
I hate unexpected events, but I will still wear it. Yeah, I know. Thank you very much. And I will wear it as soon as I find out the technique in how to put the badge on. And talking about technique, I think the next speaker will have, from what I know about him, he will also have a problem with that because he can also be a bit clumsy sometimes, especially with technique and things like that. Because that is our dear founder, you can say, the man with the vision of play the game, the man who has fought this battle tirelessly since 1997 to put all the homeless questions in sport on the agenda. Not just at these conferences, but also in his capacity as a journalist and an excellent networker, and also a very, very good speaker, as you will hear now in his opening address on the challenges facing international sport. Jens, I know you will not make all your presentation by yourself. You have some people who will come in to help you, and I will see that it works before I believe it. I know you are in a computer, but anyway, I will leave the floor to you. I told you.
So, that's better. Thank you. I'm sure you heard my introductory remarks, but I will thank for the kind words spoken today. It is really, when we think where we started, somewhat warming to know that there is a need for the kind of debates that we are going to embark on in the coming days. But an opening address, as Henrik says, I'm not sure it is a good idea. Opening a conference can be a very risky enterprise in sport. For instance, when about 100 sports federations and many other international stakeholders gathered in Sochi half a year ago to celebrate the annual convention of their common organization, Sport Accord, the opening address got dramatic consequences. The president of Sport Accord, Marius Wieser, used the occasion to do what a majority of his member federations actually had elected him to do 2 years earlier. He rendered opposition to the International Olympic Committee, whose president, Thomas Bach, was sitting in the first row. The result was astonishing. Within a few hours, his own members started to sign letters distancing themselves from Wieser, and before the Sport Accord convention was over, the majority of his members had run screamingly away, not from Sochi, but from him. Within weeks, also host cities and event organizers started to cut their cooperation with Sport Accord, and 1 month after his controversial opening speech, Marius Wieser had to resign as president, and nobody has heard much of neither Wieser nor Sport Accord ever since. So, which terrible accusations did Marius Wieser launch that could make his powerful organization all but disappear in an unprecedented chain of events? Did he accuse anyone of rape and plunder or being cruel to children and animals? No, Wieser raised purely sports political questions. He complained that he could not get in touch with the president of the International Olympic Committee. He criticized the reform package that the IOC unanimously adopted last December, the so-called Agenda 2020. The Agenda 2020 hardly brings any real benefit to sport, to the international federations, or the athletes, Sejer said. He said that the IOC system is expired, outdated, wrong, unfair, and not at all transparent. He called for more influence to sports organizations within the IOC. He suggested that even ministries of sport should be involved in decision processes for major sports events. He called for term limits for elected sports presidents and other leading officials. He said that the highest court in sport, the Court of Arbitration in Sport, should be independent. Sejer asked, how much should we continue to invest in buildings and infrastructure, and how much in people? Quote, why invest hundreds of millions of dollars in opening and closing ceremonies while millions of athletes live in hunger and they don't stand a chance in sport due to the lack of proper conditions? Unquote. Today, the money invested in sport never reaches the athletes and the families, the Sport Accord president claimed. Quote, if indeed the IOC distributes $3.25 million every day of the year for the development of sport worldwide, why do millions of athletes suffer and cannot enjoy or reach performance in sport? These questions were dangerous enough to end the influence of Sejer in international sport, although he is still the president of judo. And these were the unanswered questions that all but liquidated Sport Accord. The ruins of the organization have been taken over by people loyal to the IOC without any real intentions of rebuilding them. And nobody came to make a closure speech. And what happened to Sejer's questions? Perhaps he was not the right one to ask them, but what happened to them? As so often in sport, they are left unanswered. And I'm certainly not going to repeat them, because remember, this is not an opening address. Let me instead try to opening a conversation, and now Henrik's premonitions may come true. There are some people waiting in a car somewhere in the world. I actually don't know where. But I think these are people we have actually invited. Yulia and Vitaly Stepanov appeared in a documentary of doping in athletics made by the German TV station ARD last December. We had announced we would welcome the Stepanov couple here today, but unfortunately they had to cancel. And perhaps the Skype connection isn't even working, which is a pity because it did when we rehearsed 1 hour ago. But it is not completely surprising. Yes, there.
Hello.
Hello, Vitaly and Yulia. You are accompanied by your son, and
Yes.
we understand that this may cause some you are, but welcome very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have told you were part of. I have just told the audience you were part of a TV documentary last December. What is the main reason that you did not come here to play the game today to explain about this?
Right now we are outside of our home country, and I would like to apologize on behalf of all of our family. At this point, we just cannot. We could not travel to Denmark today.
I have to say that Yulia is a former 800-meter runner, and Vitaly was an anti-doping control officer. That was the way you met each other. And one day you decided that your cooperation of protecting each other, not only in the personal front, but also on the professional front, could not work. what happened to you? Why did you decide to come out and tell about fraud in Russian doping?
If you allow me, I just would like to say that Yulia is not. And the second part, I worked at Russian Anti-Doping Agency. I was somewhat a little higher than just doping control officer, so I was involved with other things as well. And what is the main reason we decided to tell the truth? For us, it's actually a lot simpler. The main reason for us is Mr. Zeppel, who approached us, and
he is a German reporter that you will tonight. Yes.
Yes, German investigative journalist. We met him, we talked to him, and we believed that he is doing his job for the right reasons. And we've been considering to tell the truth for many, many years before, but we just the support, and we got that support from Mr. Zeppel.
And what has the response been from the Russian sports that you helped reveal the cheating?
The response to the documentary, first of all, we did not know in anything, so we didn't know reaction, but we did think that if there would be a reaction, then we would probably be called liars and traitors. And what a lot of sports officials did say so, that we are liars and we are traitors, and we are doing what we are doing for the wrong reasons.
But what about, it is predictable that the sports leaders that you expose are not happy, but what about the Russian media and the government? Do you get some support there?
No support from Russian media or Russian, political level.
And what about the protection from the National Athletics Federation, the IAAF?
I don't know in general what people have as their motives, but I do believe that if big organizations have had some witness assistance programs, then I think national federations might be a little more cautious of what they are doing if they know that big sports organizations in general approve and support whistleblowers and witnesses that try to expose doping around the world.
You have paid a very high price. You don't know when you can come back to Russia. You cannot even tell us in which country you are now. Have you ever considered that it was perhaps an error for you? I just interrupt. The reason why it is Vitaly and not Julia is the only one who speaks is not because of that's the way it works in that family. It is because Vitaly is better in English. But it has had a high cost for you as a family. Have you regret ever that you told the truth?
We have no regrets, and obviously we are hoping that by doing our small part, maybe we can help sports competitions to become a little more fair and honest, so clean athletes have more chance.
Well, you can hear the warm applause, I hope, through the microphone you can hear the warm applause. I regret very much that you cannot be at Play the Game this year. We hope you can be with us another year, and thank the efforts to be. You can hear more about this story this evening when you meet Hajo Zeppel. She was convicted to 7.5 years in prison, charged with embezzlement, tax fraud, and what have we. Her arrest has been criticized worldwide by human rights and intergovernmental organizations who suspect that putting Khadija Ismailova in jail is simply due to the fact that she has gathered too much evidence of the ruling Aliyev family's private business affairs, including the presidential family's earnings related to the European Games in June in Baku this year. A human rights lawyer, Rasul Jafarov, who led a campaign called Sport for Rights, intending to draw attention to Azerbaijan's human rights problems in the lead up to the Games, did not get a ticket for the competitions. He was jailed on May 16 for 6.5 years for illegal entrepreneurship, tax evasion, and something called abuse of office. Tomorrow, you will meet allies of Ismailova and Jafarov, and you will also meet a brave young man, Razim Ajalov, who left his high position in the organization of the European Games when 16 people were killed in a fire in some plastic panels that were set up to decorate the neighborhood to make it look better during the Games. On Tuesday, it will also be of great interest to hear the corporate director of the European Games, Mr. Elchin Safarov, explain the legacy of the Games in Azerbaijan. We appreciate highly that the Azeri authorities have accepted to engage in an open debate. Thank you. Far away from these events, and forgotten by most of the sports public, another unfortunate whistleblower is trying to overcome financial and psychological ruin in Buenos Aires, where he lives at a minimum pension. Mario Goichman from Argentina is completely ignored by the international sports community, although he should be praised and awarded for revealing the massive personal profits, at least $33 million, that the former international volleyball president Ruben Acosta took as a share of the revenues of his sport. When Goichman from Argentina protested, he was not only banned from all volleyball, he also lost the reimbursement of $800,000 that the International Volleyball Federation owed him for organizing the World Championships in 2002. I cannot explain the case in detail here, but Goichman had guaranteed personally for a similar amount, and he is now, of course, financially broken. For the past 6 years, Play the Game has over and over again convinced Argentinian sports authorities and many others that a solution must be found to get Mario Goichman out of his tragic situation. We cannot say we have succeeded. We can only say we have given and still give the international sports community a chance to prove that they are serious when praising fair play, transparency, and good governance. Goichman is still waiting, and so are many others. Over the 18 years that Play the Game has functioned as an asylum for different kinds of whistleblowers, a home for the homeless question in sport, as you have heard, we have, with very few exceptions, received only one type of answer from the Olympic family: silence. Perhaps they believe that if they do not hear the whistleblowers, then the whistle is not blowing. Perhaps they believe that if they keep silent, problems will go away. Or perhaps the international sports federations feel that they do not really have issues worth talking about. If that is the case, we now have the evidence to prove them wrong. Later this afternoon and several times during the conference, you will get familiar with the results of our first Sports Governance Observer report. I will not go deeper into this because our minister summarized it very good with almost exactly the same words that I have used. So I will just say that the poor governance structures show that all these federations are easily exposed to corruption, mismanagement, and other kinds of exploitation by people who use sport for their own personal good. It actually means that the Olympic family has a lot to talk about. It will be very unwise to continue to ignore and expel those people who challenge the status quo. Because, ladies and gentlemen, silence does not work. Today we see how FIFA, arguably the most powerful international sports federation, is crumbling under the weight of too many years of corrupt and criminal practices and silence. When journalists and whistleblowers started raising FIFA issues at the turn of the century at Play the Game, and when Swiss investigators made their first discoveries of systematic corruption, and when it was finally confirmed in 2008 in the Swiss courts, Not only FIFA, but also the International Olympic Committee and the whole sporting family remained silent, although they knew better. Only 2 weeks ago, after 15 years, did the IOC president publicly recognize that something in FIFA was utterly wrong. Will it take another 15 years before the documented mismanagement and corruption in other sports is recognized and dealt with by the Olympic family? We hope not. If the sports movement does not react, the world outside, most of us, the governments, the sponsors, the fans, the athletes, surely will. It is already happening. Over the past 5 years, the sports debate has changed dramatically. Issues that were taboo just 10 years ago and only discussed in insignificant little gatherings like Play the Game, match fixing, corruption in organizations, unsustainable mega events, lack of attention to the everyday athletes, and so forth, these issues are now, as it has been said, mainstream. If you doubt that, just take a look at the draft UNESCO Charter in your delegate pack. We'll discuss it when we close the conference Wednesday. We have strong hopes that this new charter will inspire governments all over the world to make national strategies for sport where all the challenges are addressed and all the stakeholders consulted. As you may have noticed, the title of this conference is Global Sport, Reform or Revolution. This is partly because we are not sure, this is partly because we are sure that if fundamental reform does not happen, the sports movement that was built all the way through the 19th and 20th century will become increasingly irrelevant. In some way, a peaceful revolution is already taking place. All over the world, people engage increasingly in physical activity without waiting for decisions from above. New, innovative, communication-minded, committed entrepreneurs emerge from all corners of society. They offer new movement cultures, new events, new organization forms, in close contact with their customers, actually, just like the sports federations themselves did 100 years ago. So, there is a change, and there is a need to speak up, and there is a need for the sports federations to listen. From the turmoil we see at the top of world football and to the new trends among the grassroots, something completely new seems to happen. But if we want the new reality of sport to come better than the old one, we have to ensure that it is accompanied by an open, unrestricted dialogue that invites everybody and excludes no one, and where all questions are welcomed, especially the difficult ones. The best protection any whistleblower can get is that they live and work in an environment where conflicting interests are accepted as a fact of life and dealt with openly. We need an environment partly to negotiate the disagreements, but also to reach the best possible understanding for the world we live in and the best foundations for the decisions we make. This is the kind of environment we try to provide at Play the Game in our daily activities and every 2 years at conferences like this. To achieve that and to develop a robust democratic sports culture, we depend entirely on your assistance, and we hope you're ready. If you're not ready, I must remind you that science has just proven that you are at this moment engaging in one of the most deadly activities for the human body, sitting on a chair. So in the coming days, we urge you to raise your voice, stand up for your expertise and opinions, and be ready to get moved by your fellow conference delegates. Did I make an opening address after all? Well, please check that we are still here in 6 months' time. Thank you. It's now time to play the game.
Thank you, Jens. Silence does not work, Jens just said, and he's sure right concerning our next speakers because that is a choir. The Maestra Choir, which is here from Aarhus, they are known to perform for interpreting songs by female artists from all over the world. And we asked conductor Malene Richtrup to pick 3 songs, and I don't know if she's that familiar with the topics of Play the Game, but it seems like it, because the first one by a Danish artist called Nana Øland Fabricius, known to her fans as Åland, is called Speak Out Now. And the second one by one of the most popular Danish artists at the moment, Marie Key, is called in Danish Uden Forsvar, which means it's a reference to the local football team and to the governance structures of international sports federations, because it means without defense. And the third song, I struggled a little bit to make that fit into the picture of Play the Game, but actually we also strive to sometimes put the unexpected on the agenda, and this one is maybe slightly unexpected to some of you. It is definitely quite tongue-breaking, because it is a Finnish folk song called Kepe, and I think choirs from all over the world, they compete in interpreting that one, but you will see when you hear it. So if you are ready, then I will leave it, not the floor, but the balcony to Maestra. Yes, thank you to the Maestra Choir. Some voices are very much appreciated, some voices are less appreciated, and the last speaker before the coffee break is one of the speakers with a voice that in some circles is less appreciated, because that is Bonita Mersiades, who has worked at senior executive levels within federal government and the not-for-profit sector in Australia. Her experience in football has given her an insight into FIFA and football at all levels in Australia. As well as growing up in the game and being involved at the grassroots level as a volunteer for many years, she has also worked as a former national soccer league club for a state federation, and as a team manager for the national men's team, and as a head of corporate and public affairs with the Football Federation of Australia until her departure in January 2010. And she is now a reform activist in football and co-founder of the advocacy group New FIFA Now. Bonita, please come and tell us what it's like to be a whistleblower in football.
I feel a little bit odd up here, but I'll persevere, and I'm sorry, I am going to stand between you and afternoon tea. I'm not actually comfortable talking about what it's like to be a whistleblower for two reasons. One, it doesn't define everything that I've done in life, in my working life, or in football. I've done more than speak out about the Australian World Cup bid. And I prefer to turning my experience into something positive, such as through the new FIFA Now campaign. The second reason is that even after all this time, it's actually still a pretty painful experience when you talk about it. But Jens impressed upon me that it was important for this audience to hear this story. I was head of corporate and public affairs for the Australian Football Association, known as FFA, and was a senior executive member of the Australian bid team, responsible for media, public relations, government relations, promotions and marketing. The Australian bid was entirely publicly funded at a cost of 32 million euros from the taxpayers. I wasn't happy with the 3 international consultants we engaged, as I thought we were spending a lot of money on them, approximately 1/3 of all of that money, and they didn't appear to be doing anything much that was useful. One of them was responsible for a few key deliverables, but 2 of them operated in an entirely different stratosphere to me. That stratosphere, which is not technically one, I know, for Roger, who's a climate expert, but that stratosphere was subterranean. Some of these consultants came with baggage and history, a fact that was known inside the organisation. In fact, the day I was told that we had employed one of them in particular, my ex-boss, the CEO, took down his copy of Andrew Jennings' Fowl and said, reread the chapters on this consultant because you're going to have a lot to do with him over the next couple of years. I asked questions many times about what they were doing, why had we engaged them, pointing out their deficiencies, making note of when they said they would do things and they didn't. I did not agree with the fact that we gave $5 million to the Asian Football Confederation, we gave $4 million to the Oceania Football Confederation, and we allocated between $4 million and $8 million, and this is all Australian, for which one consultant, Fedor Radman of Germany, had, and I quote, special responsibility. The joke in management meetings was that this was brown paper bag money. Our consultants made multiple visits to Russia, Qatar and China on our behalf for reasons that to this day are still not entirely clear, but it is getting clearer every day. Jack Warner must have thought it was Christmas every time he saw an Australian. One day it was pearls, another day it was an under-20 camp in Cyprus, another day it was a prime ministerial visit with fine Australian red wine, and finally he hit the jackpot. We gave him $640,000 as a payment to upgrade a stadium in Trinidad and Tobago, just 2 months before the vote. The only thing is that no one in Australia learned about this donation until 2 years after the vote, because no one announced it. As it turned out, guess what? The stadium was owned by Jack's family, the money ended up in Jack's personal bank account, and the cheque was a generic Travelex cheque which circumnavigated the globe from Sydney to London to New York to Port of Spain. But according to the FFA president, one of Australia's richest, most successful and most powerful men, this wasn't known to them. They thought that the donation was a good idea to help out a poor nation in need. And although they do sheepishly concede now that perhaps it was a bit naive. But I wasn't naive. It was clear to me that what the consultants did was to provide an essential service in the FIFA world. They knew which part of the machinery needed greasing. They were comfortable doing deals. They knew what to do if someone sought a favour. They knew what conversations to have with whom. They provided the cover for plausible deniability for so many football officials. When I raised concerns about the lack of accountability over the free-flowing funding, I was told it was none of my business. When I asked questions about the consultants and what they were doing, I got no answers. Instead, I was sacked from my job. The sacking took place in the head office of the global retail property empire built by the billionaire president of FFA. I was told I would never work in Australia again. I wasn't even given a chance to go back to my office, pack up my desk, collect my personal things. I wasn't given a reason for losing my job, but I knew that it was because the 3 consultants didn't want me around. 13 months after my sacking, my ex-boss confessed to me that, quote, I was the victim of something much bigger than FFA. What followed in the days and weeks after I was sacked was an institutional and systematic discrediting of me. The biggest selling newspaper in the country had their sports gossip columnist write a column saying I was sacked because I was bumptious. He had never met me. I'd never even had a telephone conversation with him or an email with him. Another sports journalist wrote that I was sacked because I had stuffed up the relationships with state governments with whom FFA was negotiating over stadiums. I was never responsible for this, and the journalists knew it. In online forums, it was written by people who again had never met me that I was sacked either because I was no good at my job or having an affair with my boss or the president of FFA, or lo and behold, both of them. One of the consultants told anyone who would listen, and I'm sure some of you journalists will know which consultant this was, that I had to go because I was going to lose Australia the bid. Ironically, only 5 weeks before I was sacked, I'd received the maximum end-of-year bonus for a job well done. Prior to my departure and after the international launch of all the bids in Cape Town in December 2009, the Australian bid, which I was then overseeing, was rated by World Football Insider as equal first of the 9 bidders. Soon after I left, it slipped to 5th. By the end, it came stone, motherless, last. Even England got more votes than Australia. There's not a lot you can do when you're being trashed, unless you have enough wealth and emotional energy to take on everyone legally. You have to let it wash over you. You spend a bit of time licking your wounds. You go over conversations in your head. What if I had said this? What if I had done that? What if I had done this differently? Was I putting 2 and 2 together and getting 5 instead of 4? Had my imagination overtaken my intuition? Had my intuition overshadowed the evidence? But after a while you recalibrate. You know the metrics of your life. You remember a conversation here, an email there, a meeting somewhere else, a comment that didn't make sense, and you know without any about the uncomfortable ones. Over the following months, the disparaging personal comments continued, and they continue to this day. I was a disgruntled former employee, I was bitter and twisted, I was making it up for revenge, I had a screw loose, I was a troublemaker. All the usual things that are said about people who dare to question the status quo. At the same time, there were some within the community who thought, who cares? Does it matter that we gave $4 million to Oceania? How else did I think we were going to win? Everyone else was doing it, why shouldn't we? The end justifies the means. One journalist asked me, what was it like to be the most hated woman in Australia? By the end of 2010, I was officially declared public enemy number 1 by FFA, and the word went out to journalists, football officials and players that they Immediately after we lost the bid so badly, a prominent media personality in Australia, who is also a member of the FIFA Ethics Committee, go figure, interviewed his buddy, one of the consultants, who lamented that the reason we had lost was because Australia had played it clean and Qatar had played it dirty. It was a cringeworthy, self-serving interview from a consultant who was paid $1.5 million and got us only 1 vote. It was hypocritical because he and our other consultants attempted to play the same game. And I also thought it was racist to accuse Qatar of playing dirty, but being unwilling to admit that we did the same thing, only perhaps obviously not as well, or with shallower pockets. I didn't know the detail of Qatar's bid. By that time, Phaedra Al-Majid, the so-called Qatar whistleblower, had not spoken out, but the assumption around the world was that Qatar had bought the bid. In fact, so confronting was Qatar's win to the global community that Russia's win in just 2 rounds went largely unnoticed, let alone the conduct of losing bids. But what I realised that both Qatar, the winner, and Australia, the loser, were saying much the same thing. That is, they didn't break any rules, they were playing by the bid guidelines. And that is why my target has not specifically been about Australia other than to illustrate things, but FIFA and football administration more broadly. Australia played the World Cup bidding game the way they did because that was the environment set for it by FIFA. It is an environment that has been in place for decades. It was an environment that suited FIFA's way of doing business, the FIFA way as Loretta Lynch referred to it. It was an environment in which bid leaders can stand up and say, I didn't have that conversation with that person, or we didn't pay any bribes, because they most probably didn't. In April 2013, out of nowhere, I received a friendly email from Michael Garcia, who was then head of the FIFA Ethics Committee. I was sceptical about a so-called independent investigation by someone paid by FIFA to look into FIFA's decision-making. However, he reached out to me and I thought I should do the responsible thing and speak with him. By October 2013, in fact, while I was here at the previous Play the Game conference, he contacted me and arranged for me to travel to New York to see him the following month. As well as a promise from him about my confidentiality, he asked me not to speak with the media about my visit. I told him a little bit too late because as he had contacted me while I was at the conference, it was already known by some media representatives. 5 months later, when he came to Sydney, he admonished me for an article that appeared in the UK media about the visit. I reminded him that the journalist concerned had actually sat on the story for 6 months. We then had a further discussion about an issue related to our bid that has perplexed me for years, an issue which also perplexed him and his team, and which only recently has become clearer. We went back and forth over this issue for another 2 months or so, and then I heard nothing until November last year. I received a text message from a friend and said, "You need to look at the Eckert report, urgent." I turned on the computer and read this about me. The relevant individual undermined its own credibility by talking to the media. After reading the entire 42-page summary, including critical remarks about Phaedra Al-Majid, with a handful of people thinking about it and getting through the shock, the anger and the hurt, I was delighted. Here was a supposedly reputable German judge putting his name to a summary report of an investigation which A, didn't even speak to Spain or Portugal, B, was told by the Russians that they'd lost their computers or thrown out their computers and they couldn't help and they accepted that, C, said there was nothing wrong with the winning bids, even though they hadn't even talked to Garcia, had been prepared to put their heads above the parapet and say, this is what we know, and all but identified and discredited them. It was not only disgraceful treatment, it was really shoddy work. My immediate thought was that the first Mike Garcia I met, the one in New York, didn't do this. And while I hadn't met him, surely a respected German judge didn't do this. FIFA did this. This was their work. This was their narrative because the Eckert summary report was exactly what FIFA wanted it to say. It showed just how broken FIFA and their culture are. It is this deeply rotten culture of FIFA which I identified in a presentation I gave to the Governance Institute of Australia in 2011 as the principal reason that FIFA will only be mended, as Madam President said earlier, through independent reform led by an eminent person. As a result of the Eckert summary report, I was put in touch with British MP Damien Collins, who had previously spoken out about FIFA. Jamie Fuller, who is here today and is speaking tomorrow, and I came up with the concept of New FIFA Now. Jamie and I had actually discussed the idea for a campaign to rock the socks off FIFA when we were at the last Play the Game conference. Since the new FIFA Now launch in January, we've had cut-through in key areas, and we've started to make a bit of a difference. Slowly, very slowly. As I say regularly, I have the same view about the corrupt edifice of FIFA as the world had in relation to the Berlin Wall. It is not a matter of if it will come down, it's a matter of when and how. But for me as a whistleblower, FIFA wasn't finished. In March, I was invited to appear live on German television to talk about New FIFA Now. What I was confronted with was a senior executive of FIFA wanting to talk about, and exaggerate, something from my past 23 years beforehand. The law of Australia and many other Western countries, including Germany, considers this matter so minor that it is officially a non-matter, and it is a breach of law, an Australian law, to even talk about it. So I won't. But what it told me was this. If a senior FIFA employee, aided and abetted as he was by the chair of the Audit and Compliance Committee, was so ready and willing to break the law of another country in an attempt to discredit me, I was obviously worrying them. Their concern was on 2 points. First, the campaign for New FIFA Now, and second, the major issues I had brought to the table of Mike Garcia, which directly implicated people at the very heart of the FIFA way. In case that wasn't enough to intimidate me, and it actually wasn't, they went further. On the flight home, 24 hours in the air at 40,000 feet and heading into the Easter break, They published a website using my name, used some of my genuine blogs to make it look like it was me, and created a Bitcoin account using my name to solicit donations towards the publication of my unpublished book. It took 3 weeks and several $1,000s to shut both of them down. On at least 2 occasions, my computer has suffered massive external invasion, and websites I own have been spam attacked to the point where the hosting company had to shut down all of their sites for 4 days. These attacks have been traced to Zurich. It's more than 5.5 years since I was sacked. It's more than 5.5 years since I've had a job. It's almost 5 years since the 2018-2022 votes took place. It's 2 years since I went to New York to see Mike Garcia. It's 1 year since the Eckert summary report. Thanks to the absurdity of the Eckert report, the pressure that groups such as New FIFA Now have been able to place on FIFA and their sponsors, and the investigation of the US and Swiss authorities who, let's not forget, refer to FIFA as a racketeering organisation, it's been quite a year. As a woman who grew up in the generation and in a country where education, a career and family were all part of a package of a complete life, my career and my working life were taken away when I was still in my 40s. For all the wrong reasons, it's because I blew the whistle and took a stand. The fact that 11 of the 22 men who voted on 2 December 2010 are now banned, suspended, indicted or under investigation shows what I knew all along. The decision-making framework was corrupt because the FIFA way of doing business is corrupt. It had been for decades. Just like FIFA itself, the World Cup vote was always a busted flush. I've long held the view that sport is a community asset. It belongs to the people. Those who run our sports do it as a privilege and an honour as custodians, not as some sort of right as owners. Because of this, I don't feel as if I've done anything more than is my responsibility to my country, to the sport I love, and because I was on the inside and saw what was going on behalf of the many decent people who are fans and players who would like to see world football governed in their interests. Just as the media is the 4th pillar of democracy, I see whistleblowers as the 5th pillar, auditors of accountability and guarantors for good governance. People who are willing to ask questions for no personal gain and invariably at great personal cost. I'm committed to the cause of New FIFA Now, not because I'm bitter and twisted, but because I'm a football fan, a parent and a global citizen who values democracy, accountability, transparency and probity in our international institutions. I first started asking questions about the World Cup bidding process and the very shady characters around it in 2009. If anything I've said, written or done between then and now, contributes in any way to a world governing body for football where decisions are based on evidence and merit, where they are taken in the best interests of the game and those who love and play it, then the past 6 years hasn't been entirely wasted. Thanks.
Yes, I hope that this round of applause shows that it was highly appreciated that you decided to come here. Thank you for that. And after the coffee break, we go back to the normal play the game mode, which means that we will have the speakers in the panel after their presentation, and there will be possibility to ask questions, and Bonita will be in that panel as well. But now it's time for a coffee break, and we will resume again with Dick Pound at 4:05. Thank you.
Sound guy up there has to turn it
Oh,
on.
he does? Okay. That's good. everyone will have a chance to ask questions and participate. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, who is Richard.
My body is here, my exceeded the wildest expectations of. On the other hand, its crisis of Salt Lakes, the disclosure of unethical conduct on the part of those, I believe it's known. Our current problems at the IOC are not good. They are not at the moment even financial problems. Instead, we face yet to fully play out, to respond instantly. And can you imagine politicians in Norway, host of the immensely successful Lillehammer Games only 20 years earlier, railing that the Games, if they bid for them for 2022, would now cost Norway $51 billion? It's breathtakingly stupid analysis, but dangerous nevertheless. Similar faulty analysis in relation to the Montreal Games in 1976 took years to be overcome, long after the enormous increases in television sponsorship and ticketing made the Montreal model completely obsolete. The IOC needs to pay special attention to the relevance of the Olympic Games. We live in a different world than the one in which I grew up. In a digital world, what appears on the screen is often more real to today's youth than what actually happens. Recreation is often less physical than mental. There's a demand for instant gratification. People will not watch events they consider to be too long or too uninteresting. All sports, not just Olympic sports, face this generational challenge and must be prepared to respond to it or perish. No interest, no audience. No audience, no revenues. No participants. I speak, as you'll understand here, from the perspective of organized competitive sport, whether international or domestic. There will likely always be some forms of informal, innovative competition, but money needed to run the apparatus comes from a public that has certain expectations. Dramatically shorter attention span about match fixing. Current nightmare. Several members of its executive, as we know, have been complete are being made. And if you stay at the table in a position of power, no one else will have access to information that might bring any corruption to light. Interesting enough, the oft-reviled sponsor group may have a therapeutic role to play in this matter, should it be willing to get itself organized out of fuel. It will stop. Sponsors understand that there's brand association or linkage involved in sponsorship. They do not want their brands to be diminished by association with corrupt behavior. It would not be difficult for them, collectively, to call for major reform by FIFA, failing which their support will be withdrawn. Their efforts to date have been rejected by FIFA in an astonishingly bland denial of the suggestion. We'll see now whether the sponsors will follow through. And don't forget that sponsors are involved because their customers want them to be involved, or at least they think their customers do. If that changes, the sponsors will leave. They're not there because the chairman, you don't invest hundreds of millions of dollars over a period of time because the chairman enjoys football. It's for the business. And so if sponsors will not stay where their customers don't want them to stay. It's also within the power of governments to do the same thing. I've always thought that if I were king for a day, I would prevent any business from deducting contributions for tax purposes that are made to or for the benefit of an organization that did not have governance meeting applicable standards, whether as regards corrupt conduct generally or the specialized area in which I've been more involved, if they have inadequate anti-doping programs. If you want to see funds dry up in a hurry and get the attention of international federations, that's the sort of thing you can do. My observation is that the only place where international sports organizations feel pain is in their wallets. So hit them where it hurts. It's not difficult to anticipate that one of the ritual responses in the face of calls for conduct change that are directed at sports or autonomy must be respected. Now, I don't wish to sound unsympathetic from an earlier era. When organized sport was in its infancy, there was in matters outside of subjects such as criminal law, property, shipping, business competition, those sort of aspects of society, family law, consumer protection statutes, education, and social welfare were concepts far in the sport horizon. And time and in that regard, that has changed. Law, making and administering sports rules must be earned through responsible conduct, not the mere assertion of a former and now irrelevant status. Unfortunately, the investigation is not yet finished, and our commission is of the view that work prior to investigation might, until the report is, let me group them, unique in its ability of sport. Secondly, there's an unwillingness to confront serious problems, such as and government. That the failure to address some of these issues is going to lead to a major social health problem. The threats, I think first and foremost, is probably the loss of public confidence in the integrity of sport. Those of you familiar with sport know that the competition schedules are crowded. Many of the events are largely meaningless and are there simply to raise money. And the result is the creation of unreasonable physical demands, which, among other things, has a tendency to increase you don't get reelected if you rock it. As I said earlier, an astonishing lack of transparency, insufficient will.
All right, the first technological failure. Let me thank Dick Pound, not least for a very interesting talk, but for being right on time, and for the moderators that will follow and the speakers. That is going to help not only us to preserve our time for question and answers, but those who beam in online to see the speakers that they want to speak. So thank you. Our next speaker is Jonathan Calvert from the Sunday Times, who along with Heidi Blake wrote the definitive account of the Qatar 2022 bid, The Ugly Game. Jonathan. All right, while we locate the proper PowerPoint, we're simply going to reverse order. So the next speaker will be Nicholas Cheviron, a supervisory special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation out of Washington, D.C. Nicholas.
Thanks. Great. Nick Cheviron. I'm a supervisory special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Abilities in my current role is to oversee the FBI's sports bribery or match fixing investigation, as well as our sports bribery program. Thank Play the Game for the invitation to participate in this conference, and I look forward to an exchange of ideas and discussions throughout the next few days. I'm going to try to keep my comments short and concise so that we can have a good discussion and questions later on. But I'd like to take a few minutes to discuss the criminal threats facing the sporting industry. I think we can all agree there are a significant number of threats to both the athletes that participate in sport and the sport itself. Threats like the use of performance-enhancing drugs or controlled substances, match manipulation, and corruption, just to name a few. While I do not have time to talk about all, a little early. While I do not have time to talk about all of the threats, I'd like to address the most significant threat, and that's organized crime. And organized crime is the most significant threat in my opinion, and the opinion of the FBI. It's the driving force behind many of the threats discussed earlier, and the FBI targets organized crime as a method to attack and prevent match fixing and protect the integrity of sport. Sport by proxy has historically generated enormous amounts of illicit. Organized crime is constantly looking for new athletes to corrupt or opportunities to exploit. Illegal gambling in the U.S. is at least a $100 billion enterprise, and a significant portion of those proceeds are directly funding organized crime and their illicit activities. Furthermore, illegal gambling is often a gateway to professional athletes in the world of sport. Threats protecting the U.S. However, the access and efficiency of internet sports books enables organized crime to expand its reach and profitability to new levels. Paul Borelli and Mark Ruff were associates of the violent threat opposition of income for the group. One of the betting customers was previously employed as an assistant coach at the University of San Diego, which is a small private university in Southern California, and mentored young basketball playing habit. Because of his gambling habits, Brown routinely found himself in a position unable to repay his debts. Brown resorted to exploiting his relationships with those athletes to repay the debt. Initially, it began, as most of these cases do, by providing injury information and other insider information. The situation evolved quickly, and Brown proposed fixing games with the player to maximize the potential for money to be made. The recruitment was surprisingly easy. Brandon Johnson, the starting point guard, was dissatisfied with the coaching staff, potential profitable games by during the 2000 additional players for the scheme. Johnson transformed from the player into the recruiter and arranged for the players to meet with organized crime group. During these meetings, the group offered $10,000 to individual players to manipulate games. The organization also used Brown and Johnson to recruit players from at least 2 other universities. The attempts during the 2010 and 2011 season were ultimately unsuccessful, and the FBI coordinated efforts to arrest the organization shortly after the season. The investigation and 15 arrests resulted in sentences ranging from 6 months to 20 years. The next case is one that's going to be talked about often during this conference, and it highlights the threat to sport itself. I know we're all aware of the recent and ongoing investigation of certain members of FIFA, and I want to talk just for a few minutes about one of the initial reasons the FBI became involved. Like I said, the FBI's initial involvement in the investigation surrounded alleged criminal activities of certain members of CONCACAF, whose headquarters were located in New York at the time. Additionally, many of the alleged criminal activities utilized the U.S. banking system as a central and reoccurring tool to facilitate the alleged criminal acts. I want to spend the next few minutes discussing one of the several acts of corruption alleged in the indictment in May 2015. Again, this is one small scheme of many schemes that were alleged in this indictment, and the investigation continues today. And the Mac Warner, who at the time was the president of CONCACAF and a member of the FIFA Executive Committee, and other co-conspirators received bribery payments in exchange for their vote to select the 2010 World Cup venue. The investigation revealed that representatives from the Moroccan Selection Committee allegedly offered Warner $1 million in exchange for his vote. However, this was not a large enough amount to secure Warner's vote. It is alleged that Warner and at least 2 other co-conspirators received $10 million from the South African Selection Committee in exchange for their vote for South Africa to host the 2010 World Cup. In May 2004, FIFA's Executive Committee selected South Africa over Morocco to host the 2010 World Cup. In 2008, several payments were made totaling $10 million to accounts held in the name of CONCACAF, but controlled by Jack Warner. Soon after receiving these wire transfers, it is alleged that Jack Warner caused a substantial portion of those funds to be diverted to personal use. While this case remains in an investigative phase, a majority of the investigation and specific details cannot be discussed. I chose this portion to highlight a few points. It should highlight the dramatic consequences corruption can have on the integrity of and the potential long-lasting negative effects from those actions. Traditional and non-traditional organized crime groups all played a significant role in the cases previously discussed. By continuing to highlight organized crime influence and access in the world of sport allows law enforcement to continue to direct resources towards dismantling these groups. And the dismantling of these groups affords us with the best opportunity to protect the integrity. Emphasize some significant achievements in combating match fixing and protecting the integrity of sport. Investigations and criminal prosecutions should only be one piece of a much larger strategy. I think conferences like these and continued discussions are important steps towards ultimately developing such a strategy. A joint approach strategy that continues to assess and develop best practices for sports governance. We must all accept our role and the part we play in the strategy. I'm confident that our discussions throughout this conference will continue our path to success. Thank you.
All right, if PowerPoint agrees with us, then let me once again welcome Jonathan Calvert to the podium from the Sunday Times and co-author with Heidi Blake of The Ugly Game, which is the definitive account of the Qatar 2022 bid. Jonathan, try again.
One or two technical difficulties there. I'm Jonathan Calvert. I'm the editor of the Sunday Times Insight team. The Sunday Times Insight team is a long-running investigative team run by our newspaper over 50 years. It has a magnificent tradition, and I've been editing it for 10 years, and hopefully we have done quite a lot of work on FIFA over the last 5 years. It's not the only thing we do. We dip in and out of it. We're not sports specialists, but FIFA is a subject that came up back in 2010. Let's see if this is going to work. I don't think it's going to. Is it going to? Yeah. Oh, there it is. Thank you. Well, I think you all know about FIFA. It's been in the news a lot recently. I think one of the key things to know about FIFA is that it was sort of set up as a kind of gentleman's club back in the early 20th century. And it's sort of remained that way ever since, despite the fact it became a completely money-spinning organisation as a result of running the biggest sporting tournament in the world, which is the World Cup. It brings in something like £4 billion. And as a result of that, you have this strange small committee at the top running with a huge amount of budget. And they've kept the same sort of ethos, and so there is no transparency, it's very secretive, and there are a certain number of people at the top who think that actually the whole thing is for themselves. We became involved back in 2010. We had a couple of people came to us with who were sources saying that that there was the bidding for the 2018 and 2022 World Cups was corrupted by people making offers. And at the time when we looked at FIFA, there wasn't an awful lot written. I mean, there was, believe it or not, I know we've talked about some FIFA before 2010, but apart from a couple of great books, FIFA remained a very, very secretive, unknown organisation to the ordinary reader. And actually, in researching it initially, we found it quite difficult to penetrate and find out much about the various characters involved. And one of the things we decided to do at that stage was to go undercover. And we posed as lobbyists for a group of companies which was supporting one of the bids, and went around trying to hire ex-FIFA Executive Committee members, former FIFA employees, and talking to some of the 24 voters whose decision it was to grant the 2018 and 2022 World Cups. As a result of that, we wrote on the 17th of October 2010, we wrote this story here, which was World Cup votes for sale. The main headline was about two of the members of the FIFA Executive Committee who had talked about selling their vote, sorry. But it was a much wider story than that. The story itself had something like sort of 8 officials involved in it. And the gobsmacking thing was that we went to these people sort of just saying, what do you need to do to win a World Cup bid? And to a man, and they all are men on the FIFA committee, and to a man, they all said, well, you've got to pay certain members, which is quite extraordinary, and I've never known anything like it. They're all saying exactly the same thing, that this isn't a fair process, you actually have to pay bribes. And so, as a result of that, 8 FIFA officials were suspended, including 2 of the voters who weren't allowed to vote in the 2022 World Cup. I mean, and one of the things that we had huge amounts of information on our tapes from all these undercover interviews, and a lot of these people were telling us about other bids and what they were up to, and there was a lot of allegations about Qatar, and we gave all of this to FIFA. And in fact, also actually, the chap who was just speaking mentioned the Moroccan bid. We had lots of allegations about the Moroccan bid for the 2010 World Cup, which we one FIFA executive member was saying that his colleagues took votes, another one was saying he took votes. I mean, it was extraordinary. It took bribes, and it was extraordinary. And we gave all this to FIFA, and what did FIFA do with it? Nothing. They just suspended all the people who had said these things and then didn't look at it any further. And so, I mean, as a result, Qatar did win the 2022 World Cup rather controversially, and there were a number of allegations floating around. And in our initial sort of attempts to do stories about this and actually get some of the information that had been on our tapes about Qatar out into the public domain, we came up against their lawyers, and in the end, the Parliamentary Select Committee in the United Kingdom, the Commons Media Select Committee Media and Sport Select Committee was doing an inquiry into the failed England bid, which had only got 2 votes. And as a result, they asked us to submit evidence. So we submitted evidence, which we could do under parliamentary privilege, which had all the evidence of the people who were talking about the offers that Qatar was allegedly making. I must say that Qatar always denied this. And also, we also submitted evidence in that of a whistleblower, Fedra Al-Majid, who said that she had witnessed payments being made to FIFA executive members. As a result, this went around the world, and just as it was happening, Mohammed bin Imam, who I'll talk about later, was caught paying bribes in the presidential race. And out of all of this, FIFA decided that it needed some sort of reform. It needed to look like it was doing something. So it created a new 2-chamber ethics system where you'd have an investigator, Michael Garcia, and you'd have a Judge Eckhart, who would sort of decide on the adjudicatory chamber. And we sort of went away and did other things. And in 2012, by then I was joined by my colleague Heidi Blake, who was to do most of this work with me. We were approached by somebody who was representing a very powerful figure in world football. We were given documents which showed that the son of one of the voters had been offered $1 million contract by Qatar to put on a dinner ahead of the South African World Cup. It was called the Legends Dinner. When we did our research, the dinner itself would only have cost $200,000, so the benefit to the son of one of the voters was absolutely huge, $800,000. Qatar said it pulled out of the bid out of the dinner at the last moment, realizing that it was the wrong thing to do. But this started an investigation by Michael Garcia that was to become the bigger investigation that in the end, actually, when you look at the way things have unfolded, is the thing that is finally bringing Blatter down now. And so it started this big investigation by Garcia. He very quickly widened it out to include all the 9 bidders for the 2018 and 22 World Cup competitions. While he went around the world, spent $6 million doing this, went around asking people, did you pay bribes? And they say no, and he said, oh, well, thank you then, and that was about as far as it all seemed to go. And while he was doing this, in early 2014, we were given a huge cache of documents, access to this enormous database full of all sorts of fascinating documents, many of which related to the bidding process for the 2022 World Cup. In order to get there, this is Heidi and I in our little bunker. Well, we called it bunker. We had to go and work out of London for quite a long time because it was the only place we could access this information. And you can see there was, we were going through enormous files, and we had this sophisticated computer system to go through it. And what it really told us about is it told us an awful lot about the activities of this man, who is Mohammed bin Hammam, who is Qatar's top football official. Now, and what we could see was that Mohammed bin Hammam was going around the world making payments to football officials all over the place. And what he was trying to do, he was trying to create a groundswell of support for the Qatar bid. And this is a little map of some of his payments. What he did is he channeled them through his company Chemco, and then some of them would go out through his daughter's Asia's account. Others would go out through. I think there were 10 different slush funds he used to make all the payments. We worked on it probably for the whole of the summer, and just before the World Cup last year in Rio, we ran the first of our stories on what we called the FIFA files, which is this story here, and the basics. Basically, it sort of outlined all the payments bin Hammam had made, all the junkets he'd taken all the officials on, and there were direct, the 1.6 million pounds he paid to the notorious Jack Warner, one of the FIFA voters, and also the money he paid to Reynald Tamari, which effectively blocked a vote against, which would have gone against Qatar. The story went on over 3 weeks, and it went around the world. But what was Sepp Blatter's reaction? Sepp Blatter got up the week after we'd done the first story and told the Asian and the African Confederation meetings that this was all inspired by racism, and that's why we'd done it. And then, just incidentally, he added that he was starting his campaign to become the president, and he was going to increase the money to all the federations by double. And at the same time as all this was going on, you would have thought that the FIFA Executive Committee, those 24 men, would be on their best behaviour. But no, when they got to their hotels in Rio, what should be waiting for them but a £25,000 watch? Now, FIFA's own rules say that they're not allowed to accept gifts. In fact, it was the FIFA Executive Committee that voted in those rules, and yet they all pocketed these watches, which is a story we wrote in September, and apart from 3 of them who did object, only 3 did turn them back. And what did Michael Garcia do when we came out with our initial findings? The day after our first story, which was 11 pages in the Sunday Times, which is unheard of except in wartime, actually, in terms of the amount of coverage we give to one story. He got up and told everybody that he had finished the evidence gathering part of his inquiry, so he just wasn't going to take the information at all. He was completely closed to it. And what he did was he went away, wrote his report, submitted it to Judge Eckert. Eckert put out this summary of it, which we know about. Garcia, as soon as he saw it within hours, decided decided that this was absolutely outrageous and appealed against it and thought it was wrong, and it was a complete and absolute shambles. And FIFA now have said that we will one day see a redacted copy of the report. We imagine it will look a bit like this, actually. And what happened, of course, is that Garcia's report, the bits we know, the bits that's summarized by Eckhart, completely cleared both the Russians and the Qataris of any wrongdoing. And one of the things that we were later to reveal in our book, which is this one here, a game, which was out earlier this year, was that a deal had been struck between in which bin Hammam was asked to not stand against Blatter in 2011, and in return, Blatter would support the Qatar 2022 World Cup bid, and that was the sort of where we were when we wrote our book, and an awful lot has happened since. I mean, I have to say that. It's almost like the organisation is eating itself. We felt that we sort of pushed FIFA up to a certain level, and now it's just sort of tumbling down and falling over itself. And obviously, you know, there are two major investigations, and they're all and there will be more and more to come with FIFA in the future. We haven't left it. We will be going back to it in the future. We and I think if you're looking for change from FIFA, I don't think that you can't have minor change. I mean, you have to have absolutely root and branch change. I think you probably need to scrap the whole organisation and start again. I think it's probably the only way you could do it, because it's so riddled with corruption. I mean, and I think the damning indictment against Sepp Blatter over the years has been not necessarily that he's always been corrupt himself, but that he's always turned a blind eye to it because that suited him, because that's how he kept power. So anyway, if anyone would like to discuss any of these things, I'm here with my colleague George Arbuthnot, and or other stories. I mean, we've recently been doing a lot on the IAAF and doping. We'd be delighted to talk to you over the next few days if anyone wants to talk.
Well, I think you'll agree that was well worth the wait for PowerPoint. PowerPoint's coming up again. All right, our next speaker is Pete Nicholson, who's Ethics Officer for the International Cricket Council. Pete.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. While we get this sorted out, here we go. It's a very ad hoc role being an ethics officer for the International Cricket Council. By contract and definition, there's not much to do, it seems, at the moment. My other role in sport, for my sins, was I was part of the independent commission that investigated the history of doping in cycling for the International Cycling Federation and the history of corruption in that sport. We were given 12 months, probably wasn't long enough. Okay, my real role in life, or my normal role in life, is working in the field of international criminal law, where for 15 years or so I've been investigating crimes against humanity, war crimes and genocide in a number of different theatres, including in Africa, Europe, in Lebanon, and now in Syria and in Iraq. And I was asked to make some observations by Jens on the type of work that I do and the type of work that I did in sport, and come up with some thoughts about some observations about that, and perhaps try and suggest some ideas. So it's a little bit of a different presentation from that which you've already received. I'll go quite quick because I'm very mindful. I think I'm the last presenter. Everybody wants to get to the bar. And supreme irony for me, Australia are playing Argentina as I talk to you now, and as a naturalised Australian, this is killing me. Really? To whom? Hey, go Aussie, go Aussie. Just keep shouting whenever you want, no worries. Jens mentioned the UNESCO new charter, so I just had a look at it. The largest article, the longest article, is the one about integrity and ethics. And you can read that, but transnational organised crime, the point I wanted to make there, a bit of a techno failure with the arrow. The point I wanted to make there is it's not just outsiders that practice transnational organised crime. We've just heard from Jonathan in particular that sports administrators and even athletes are also involved in transnational organised crime. What else is FIFA's latest round of stories if not transnational organised crime? There's only one set of criminality that sort of goes above that, in my opinion, and that's the sort of stuff that I do. But let's have a quick look, because doping is a theme in this particular conference, or anti-doping, or both actually. Let's have a quick look at some observations that I made when I was doing the cycling investigation. If you're an athlete, when you get told there's a load of stuff you can't do, like don't take these substances, you're also being told at the same time there's a load of stuff you can do, which might also include a whole load of complex and performance-enhancing substances. And it causes more than a dilemma. It causes great variance in the definition of what being clean is from an athlete's perspective. I'm sure this is not purely cycling orientated. I'm sure this is across all sport. We heard so many different definitions from athletes of what being clean meant. And until we can resolve that, I think we are always leaving room for athletes to interpret those rules as they see fit according to their own moral and ethical guidelines. Jonathan mentioned about his work on exposing so-called suspicious athletes. This was very evident in cycling too. There's an enormous area where athletes riders are in the area of suspicious. They're never suspicious enough to warrant a full investigation for their potential anti-doping violations. They remain somehow only suspicious. But why do we keep that a secret? We'll come back to that. What are the incentives to not cheat in any sport? Is it really just because it's a good thing to do? Isn't that running contrary to what an athlete's there for in the first place, if they're an elite athlete, which is to win at all costs? It's very difficult for an athlete to reconcile those two things, I think, if they can see that the playing field is palpably and evidently not level. So I'm wondering about our own deterrence in sport, and are we really playing the game in terms of giving the opportunity for the non-cheating athlete, the best opportunity they can possibly have? Here's some observations from my world, okay? Let's not forget, if you're talking about war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide, they're pretty serious crimes. In fact, globally, I don't think you can get anything more serious than that. But in my world, you're allowed to do this if you think you have reasonable grounds to believe someone has done something very naughty. You're allowed to do something about that. You're allowed to investigate it if, you know, all else being equal, and that you can show that there's reasonable grounds, that you have some evidence to believe that something needs to be done. And if someone you accuse shows up in a courtroom, you better show that you have substantial grounds to believe. And if the pre-trial chamber believe you have substantial grounds to believe a crime has been committed, a trial will take place. And then really, if to secure a conviction, you need to have beyond reasonable doubt. But my observation is in sport, there doesn't seem to be any opportunity for the governing authorities to have reasonable grounds to believe and begin an investigation and make it public and move forward and collect information. Perhaps not even substantial grounds. What it means is, to me, it means in your enormous grey area of suspicious athletes in sport, where their names are kept secret, where they howl from the rooftops, when their blood values are rendering them perennially suspicious, but never significantly enough so to be investigated. How do you why use the word suspicious? How do you define what that could mean? Surely it must mean you would have reasonable grounds to believe that the athlete is doing something, or maybe even substantial. My point is, within sport, if you think they are suspicious, do something about it. Change your rules. Go into a new paradigm. For example, make some wild assumptions. Why don't you assume that many or most athletes cheat? They'll lie about it and they'll remain in permanent denial. The language of denial is rich, it's deep, and it's, in some respects, what I experience with some athletes. Levels. Higher set of rules around the privilege of being able to compete that athletes have to sign up to. Because privileges come with obligations, so you can write into athletes' contracts any number of different things that they would be obliged to do if they were found to be suspicious. We'll come on to that. Maybe the benefit of the doubt that's continuously and traditionally afforded to all athletes, that we assume no athlete dopes and there are only a minority that do. Maybe it's time to reverse that, make that wild assumption. And let's say the benefit of the doubt is not afforded to athletes anymore. Create systems and processes, because they're not going to be done purely on an ethical and moral basis, where winning within the rules is the only way to win. You cannot actually do it another way. And do it in such a way that non-cheaters at least get their level playing field and they're not affected. So here's some thoughts. I see that UCI actually announced this on the 5th of October, which I was pleased to see. All I would say is, what a great idea, UCI. They've decided that they will, over 10 years, they use the word potentially, test samples from athletes that come in. The athlete remains clean every year from the newest tests that are available. I think it's a valedictory performance from that athlete, and they should be championed for it. If an athlete falls by the wayside 8 years on because testing's caught up with doping, then the athlete should suffer a number of different penalties. My point is this, certainly if you look at cycling, why would you test over 600 or do over 650 tests at the Tour de France? I mean, really today, are athletes going to show up and become positive at that point? Maybe some of the less careful ones, but I think that's frankly an enormous waste of money, and it'd be better not to show up at all and spend all that money on doing different forms of investigation and historic testing. And why I say that is because I think you'd have to look at the figures, but perhaps you wouldn't have to spend another $1 doing historic testing, which is possibly a greater deterrence to athletes than showing up 3 days before an event and being tested then. What about saying something like, if you've got suspicious tests, done 3 suspicious tests, then that does trigger an investigation. And maybe the investigation should be done by an investigator, a full-on professional investigator, where you're obliged to disclose all your contacts, all your medical contacts, all the doctors, all the clinics that you go to. You're obliged to disclose your phone records, maybe even your bank accounts. There's something not dissimilar to that in cricket. If a cricketer is assumed to, or it has reason, if the investigating authorities have reasonable grounds to believe a cricketer is involved in corrupt practices, they are obliged to relinquish this kind of information to the authorities. I've even put lie detector tests. How terrifying would that be for an athlete? You know, it might be good for a hardened intelligence professional to try and beat a lie detector test, but good luck to athletes. Not that I hold enormous faith in those things, they may or may not work, but it would certainly put an extra amount of pressure. It's quite an extreme suggestion, but really, you're in quite an extreme situation if you ask me. Why not suggest when under investigation for purely suspicious values that you can still compete, but you can't win anything, but you don't compromise the other members of the team who potentially are not doping. It's another way of looking at it. What I would say is you need to improve your powers in sport. I just think that there are not enough powers available to the authorities to get on and investigate what needs to be investigated. I've talked about contracts. I think international federations are caught in a moral and ethical dilemma at the top. On one hand, you know, they don't want their federation to crash and burn with their top athletes being caught out cheating or doping. On the other hand, they have a moral and ethical obligation to manage their sport in the cleanest and most ethical way it can. It actually shouldn't be a dilemma at all. If you are the boss of an international federation, if that is not front and center and number one on your list, then you probably shouldn't even be the boss. That would be my opinion. But why not subject international federations? Well, first of all, why not get them to link and share knowledge? They do seem to be not good at sharing information and knowledge. For example, on the medical clinics, that different athletes will use. You know, let's remember rather some of the doctors of old who don't just dope cyclists, they dope athletes. They dope athletes that have perhaps a similar doping requirement. So share knowledge across international federations. Why not externally audit international federations to examine how well they are managing their investigative processes? I don't mean financially audit them, although that's probably pretty necessary. Why not create an ISO, an international standard for investigations, sporting investigations, for minimum acceptable standards that every single federation has to execute? Has to execute, because if you don't, you have participation penalties. You'd have to get the IOC perhaps to create a series of penalties where international federations are not allowed to participate at the top table if they're not fulfilling their obligations. Should there be some form of independent investigations body across all federations or at the IOC level? And I don't mean a pseudo-independent body, I mean a properly independent body that can conduct investigations, share and pool knowledge across all federations. These are the threats I think Dick Pound mentioned, others have mentioned, and certainly are in the UNESCO treaty. Those are the threats at the bottom bullet. I've put doping twice. That was an accident, but actually probably is probably quite reasonable to put it in there. But what needs to happen, you need to identify those issues, integrate them across the board. They're not isolated, silo-like issues. We've heard from other speakers, many of these slide a few other areas where one can link criminality or the investigations into crimes back into the sporting world, some of which are happening now. I have to say, some of which are going at a sort of geological time progressive rate, and we need to speed that up. There is an awareness, that certainly I found that in cycling, to how we need to improve our investigative approach. But some of them would be, we should engage more with people like Europol and obviously national criminal law enforcement frameworks. Most law enforcement people, to engage with them, you need to be able to offer them something of value. If you're a sporting federation, do you have information of value that you could give to a law enforcement agency and whet their appetite to support you? And the answer is yes, if you collect properly, if you collect in the right areas, if you collect deep enough and with the right emphasis in a multi-sourced environment. And then you can invoke the police or law enforcement community, border force, border guard. They have stronger, greater, more broad and deeper powers than any international federation. They may well be interested in invoking those powers if you provide them with the right sort of information. It's already been brought up. Collect on amateurs. You know, the amateur scene is an area where organised crime interfaces, as I understood from cycling. You know, the business of running gyms and providing steroids and other performance-enhancing substances to amateurs who are just interested in doing that stuff, either on a sort of a body enhancement basis or to compete at an amateur level or just for the hell of it. But collect on all of these areas, clinics and doctors, obviously on corruption, on financial streams, on the business of clustering, which seems to be an odd phenomenon going beyond, I think, cycling, where lots of different services are offered to athletes in certain parts of the world, in certain small towns, in otherwise unspectacular locations. Sport needs to get out and collect that sort of stuff and do it across the board and start to work out where these international networks are. When you have a clinic that's a wellness clinic, which is a perfectly legitimate thing to be, but is also a cover for performance enhancement doping of athletes, those are kind of what I call bottlenecks. So you can investigate individual athletes, of which there are tens of thousands, but I bet there are not tens of thousands of clinics. I bet there are many hundreds. And once you start to investigate many hundreds and strangle that bottleneck, you start to restrict tens of thousands of athletes getting access to what they want to get access to. Then you start to really interdict on the problem. The last thing, I think, again, I noticed this in cycling, I've noticed it in WADA and other places. Start to use people outside of sport. Start to use law enforcement officers, former intelligence officers, people who carry government clearances with them. already, and start using systems that can actually store information and classify information and protect information. When you start to do that and start to attack what is basically attacking sport with outside technologies, methodologies, the emphasis will start to change, and athletes will start to realize
Thanks, Pete. All right, we have one more speaker before we call everyone up for the panel discussion. Arnaud Gerard, who I know I did not pronounce that very well, is part of the team who produced the Sports Governance Observer. He's also one of the many individuals who's buying Henrik a beer tonight in the bar after the discussions. So a briefing on the Sports Governance Observer.
Let's check this first. Okay, great. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I am Arnaud Gerard. You actually pronounced it pretty good, I would say. Congratulations for that. I am a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Leuven. I also work as a governance advisor for Play the Game. And my main job in the past year, I would say, has been to write this report, Sports Governance Observer report. This is part of your conference package. I understand that you have been given a voucher and you can get one of these copies. Do it if you're interested and read it. But today I just want to walk you through the contents of this report. I'll keep this very brief. Sports Governance Observer. I think in the next few days we will talk about governance. We will talk a lot about governance. We'll talk about governance failures, and maybe some of you will wonder at one stage, at one moment in the next few days, do we need international sports federations? You will hear about corruption, you will hear about mismanagement. Do we need them? Think about it. Do we actually need these organizations? My answer to this question is pretty simple. Yes, we need them. I think we need them, and I think we need them more than ever. Main reason is that international sports federations, they have the potential to bring order and structure into an increasingly complex sporting world, confronted with many, many challenges. There is no global government that can take over these tasks, these important tasks for these federations. Now, of course, only when these federations have solid structures in place, and only then will they be equipped to deal with the many challenges that face international sports governance today. And you will hear about these challenges. You have heard about some of these challenges today already. Transnational corruption, money laundering, human trafficking, doping, match fixing, and so on. The big problem is that the majority of these federations, the majority of international sports federations have flawed institutional design. Flawed institutional design, in other words, bad governance. They are characterized by bad governance. So, on the one hand, we really need these federations. We need them to work effectively. We cannot do without them. On the other hand, we see that they are not equipped to deal with the many challenges that face international sports governance today. And that is exactly the reason why we developed the Sports Governance Observer. Now, I must stress that this Sports Governance Observer finds its origins into a project funded by the European Commission, by European Commission's Sports Unit, a project that involves 6 European universities and the European Journalism Center. Project that was headed by Play the Game, Danish Institute for Sports Studies. The main outcome of this project was a checklist of indicators of good governance. Now, what did I do in this report? I took this checklist and I developed it further into a benchmarking tool for good governance. So we have 36 indicators for good governance, the checklist of good governance, dispersed over 4 dimensions. For each indicator, I developed a scoring system. Scoring system with a scoring scale ranging from 1 for not fulfill at all, to 5 state-of-the-art for each indicator. If you apply this benchmarking tool to an international sports federation, any sports federation, you get a score. This was what I call a sports governance observer index, an SGO index, as a measure of good governance, a percentage score. Now, what did I do? I applied this tool to the 35 Olympic international sports federations. And the results are presented in this report. Now, the goal of this sports governance observer report, I would say, is twofold. Surprised. Second purpose of the sports governance observer is to exercise pressure, because not only do we need to inform these people that are willing to reform, we also need to exercise pressure, because I have also encountered many people that were resistant to change, that did not want to improve their governance. For these people, a sports governance observer is designed to exercise a little pressure so that they will engage in reforms. And we do need reforms in international sports governance, in international sports federations. These are the general results of the application of the sports governance observer to the 35 Olympic international sports federations. And you see here that when you apply this tool, you get an SGO index, so a good governance score, an overall mean score of 45%. This is very low. I'll go into this later on. Of course, when you assign scores to each federation, that allows you to make a ranking. And I know that this is what journalists particularly like, a ranking, but I also know that when you look at this, many of you will think, why is FIFA second in this ranking? Maybe that's the $1 million question, or the $1 billion question. Why is FIFA second? Isn't FIFA this organization that is corrupt, that needs change badly? The answer is yes, and it still needs change. FIFA, given its size and relevance, should actually get a state-of-the-art score. A score in the 90s, maybe even 100%. And what do we do of good governance? A few years. They have made changes, but these changes are not sufficient. I think Roger's work has been excellent in showing that they did not implement the changes that they should have. Now, enough about FIFA. I think what is more important is that FIFA is among the highest scoring federations does not really say a lot about FIFA. It says a lot about the other federations. Take a look at this. 26 federations, that's 74%, actually achieve a score of less than 50%. That's less than 50% on basic elements of good governance. This means that they have very weak structures in place. Yeah? Now, I know that these kind of benchmarking exercises are always subject to criticism. They are, inherently maybe not always objective. When you give a score of 1, when you give a score of 4, when you give a score of 5. And this is why I also conducted a study. So in this report, you will also find a scientific study just based on what I found in these federations, based on which structures I observed. Yeah? And you can read these conclusions in the report, but let me just walk you through some of the most important ones. Found that only 4 federations have a nominations committee in place that performs integrity and professional checks for candidates standing for election. Only 12 federations publish externally audited annual financial reports. None of the federations publish reports on remuneration. Only 6 federations have clear conflict of interest rules. None of the federations has an objective and a transparent process for the selection of hosts for major events. 12 federations do not have an ethics committee in place, and only 5 federations have a robust ethics committee in place. 6 federations, only 6 have an internal audit committee that is working good. And finally, only 11 federations have some form of limitations of terms, and none of them have actually adequate term limits. So I think it's fair to say, in all objectivity, to improve their governance. It's really important. And also to help us with our tool. A benchmarking tool is always an ongoing process. It's never perfect. Sports Governance Observer is not perfect. It will never be. But engage in a dialogue with us. Help us. I really do believe that we share a common goal for better sports governance. Thank you very much.
All right, let me ask all of our speakers to come up to the panel. We are under time pressure. We are been told that we are to be out of this room at 6 o'clock sharp. And that means that we will have limited time for questions and answers, which means you'll leave this session wanting more, so you will get more in the next couple days. So what I propose to do is, and I should say, Bonita Mersiades is joining us, as is Michael Ask, who will be on the panel tonight. I'm going to take 3 questions from the audience. I'm going to ask that your questions be in with a question mark. We don't have time for statements. And then I'll turn it over to the panel, and I'll ask the panel not to make speeches, but to make quick responses. And if we're lucky, we can do this 2 or 3 times, 2 or 3 rounds before we have to go. We have mobile microphones out in the audience, so if you'd like to just raise your hand if you'd like to make a question. We have one up in the front, one in the back. And let me take 3 questions, panel, before I turn it over, and then we'll start with Dick Pound and go down the line, and you can answer as you see fit. So in the back, the first question. Yeah, and please say your name when you...
Hi, I'm Louis. I'm here representing the German Sports University. My question actually concerns Peter Nicholson's presentation about doping. You present a lot of very extreme things to counteract doping. I know there's already wearable norms and getting rid of this idea of the benefit of the doubt. And I kind of feel like that's getting rid of due process. And I don't know if, as a normal human being, I'd be okay giving that up. So why should it be okay for an athlete to just give up those basic human rights, basic fundamental rights, and that idea of due process?
All right, next question up front.
Thank you. Okay, I'm Rob Steen from the University of Brighton in England. I'd like to ask Nicholas a question, really. You're familiar, probably more than anyone else here, about what happened in 1919 with the Chicago Black Sox, White Sox, whatever you want to call them. Zero tolerance was the attitude then. We're nearly 100 years on. Would you suggest that a sport like cricket, which is my own personal love, should adopt a zero tolerance policy towards anyone connected with match fixing?
All right, before I turn it over to Pete and Nick, Michael, could I ask you to give a 1-minute introduction of who you are and...
Yeah, it works. Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Michael Ask, and I'm the CEO of Anti-Doping Denmark. I have a background in law enforcement, almost 30 years, and I was selected as the new CEO for Anti-Doping Denmark 4 months ago. I think a lot of the subjects that especially Peter and Nick touched upon is very relevant for the work I can see. It was mentioned about collecting information, intelligence, sharing information, and generally starting to cooperate much closer, not only with law enforcement and law enforcement agencies, but also internationally between national anti-doping organizations, international federations, and WADA. I think Nick can probably confirm that 30 years ago there was a lack of international cooperation when it comes to law enforcement, and there's been done a lot during the last years to improve that, and I think I can see a lot of possibilities to do that in the same way, more or less, when it comes to not only the anti-doping work, but generally cooperating in all kinds of bribery, etc. Thank you.
All right, so Pete, the first question was directed at you, and I'll rephrase it as, what about athlete rights? Some of these extreme solutions, do they go too far?
Hello?
Yeah.
No one heard me swear, did they? I think that athletes' rights need to be don't move. I would any not quite on abuse of human rights, but the for athletes there's
a lot of sport has evolved, but to your point, the FBI law enforcement, our view or our involvement in the world of sport is relatively narrow, and which makes it sort of refreshingly simple. We just investigate violations of criminal law, and our sentences are very clear based on that criminal law, and so we stick to those sorts of investigations. There's a lot of things a lot of good ideas here that sports industries and federations bring up as good ideas to sort of push back any sort of participation in match fixing and things like this, but our view is relatively simple, and we only go where the criminal investigations take us. Sometimes those criminal investigations are in the world of sport.
All right, let's take a few more questions. Way far in the back corner, there's one.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dave Ridpath from Ohio University. My question is for Bonita. I was very struck by your story and know several in my line of research, which is American college sports, that have faced similar things. My question to you is, what can we do to encourage more people to come out? Because obviously, the easier thing is to not do something. What can we do to encourage more people to come out, to speak out, and give them the strength and the backing, and also let them know it is going to be tough, but that they will still want to do that and see it through?
All right, let's take another question.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Hannibal Chaim from Brazil, São Paulo, University of São Paulo. I have a question to the Mr. Nicholas Cheviron from the FBI. I made a research about how Jean Avelange, the former president of FIFA, came elected to FIFA in 1974. This was my master's degree research. And by doing this study, I came to the conclusion that since this year, 1974, we have evidences enough for knowing that Avelange is not exactly a person in which you can trust in. So I would say that I am sure that the FBI knows too much more than me about this stuff. But if by my own sources I could get to this conclusion, I know that the FBI, I believe that the FBI could have reached it maybe before. So, congratulations for the job you did now in May 2015. We were waiting
so
for
I'm going to suggest that we get to the question part of the question.
Okay. Why didn't you do it before? I believe it would be possible for making this before. You can tell me that it was not. So if it wasn't, why it was not possible before?
Okay, let's take one more question and see if we can squeeze it in. Right up here in the front in the blue. Yeah.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. My name is Aderonke Bello from Nigeria. My question goes to Jonathan. Jonathan, hi, and I really salute what you've done. I'm an investigative journalist as well. I specialize in sports. I want to talk about Adamu. I was at his house last week. I went to see him in the house, and I've been chasing him for an interview for so long. Since he became born again, according to him, he has not done much. But he has been coming out recently to talk about sport, about the FIFA and all of that recently. So I went to his house, I spoke to him. I said, I want to interview you. So he told me, he said he's not ready for an interview. But while chatting with him off record, he said that Sepp Blatter actually set him up, that I think the English people are working against him, and that the English people also promised to develop sports in my country, Nigeria, that was what happened, that you guys twisted the report. And being the kind of training I have gotten, I'm not supposed to talk. You have to listen and just listen to what they are not telling you. When you are talking to people like that, you try to listen to what they are not saying. You know, my point here is that how far are you done with the investigation? Talking about Maestra Choir, what's the way forward? What's the next thing? Because it's back to CAF right now. So I'm talking to you, it's back to CAF, and I'm ready to actually work with you to see how we can actually get rid of that undercover maybe. Then number two, the same to Samson Adamu. Where did you stop? I'm talking about the story you made about him, which I reproduced. Of course, we reproduced it, we gave you credit, but what's the way forward? What next? Because nothing has been happening. The guy has been organizing Copa Nigeria all over the place, and
okay, I'm going to throw it to the panel at this point. So we have 3 questions, panelists, about 1 minute each, and then we'll finish on time. So Bonita, what can we do to encourage others to speak out?
Look, I think to answer the question very quickly, 2 things. One, I think to recognise the fact that people who dissent, people who raise their voices, people who ask questions are, as I mentioned towards the end of my speech, the 5th pillar of democracy. And if we value democracy, then we also value people who ask questions. The second thing, and it's a much harder one, it's the practical support for people. I mentioned I've been out of work for 5.5 years. I know other whistleblowers who have lost their homes, who have got mental health problems only because of what's happened to them, being sacked, no longer having work, no longer having any finances. And there has to be a recognition within governments or some sort of civil society organisation that there are some really practical things that can be done to help people, because they shouldn't be put out to pasture, whether they be in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s or whatever, because they've told the truth.
All right, Nick gets the next question, and let me just say that the question for Nick is a question that everyone in the sporting community ought to be asking. Why is it so obvious to everyone for a long time, particularly if you attend Play the Game, what's going on in FIFA, but action only occurs at a certain time? So more generally, why does the FBI do what it does and set the priorities the way it does?
Well, again, answering only specifically to the FBI's portion of this, you know, as I mentioned in my speech, the FBI centrally became involved with the FIFA case because of the U.S. banking system, a lot of the activities surrounding some of the members being headquartered in the U.S. There has to be certainly a U.S. nexus for the FBI to get involved. But to a larger point, law enforcement, I think rightfully so, has a much harder level of, you know, we have to prove these things in court. It's much different than just knowing something's going on or believing something's going on. Particularly in the U.S., it's very difficult to prove some of these things. So it's not as if that law enforcement does not want to help, but we're not allowed if we can't prove the case in court. I would also note that investigative journalism, you're privy to some information that we may not have, and law enforcement cannot help if they're not aware of problems. So again, to sort of speak to cooperation, if you feel like things are going on, certainly locally, the FIFA investigation continues to expand and learn of new information. So you know, we follow the case as best we can, but sometimes our laws prohibit us from proving those things.
All right, Jonathan, I suspect the answer to the several questions is going to require a further conversation between you two, maybe at dinner, but I'll let you.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yes, I mean, I read that article. I thought it was completely bonkers. I mean, he's someone who refuses to accept his guilt. He's been before the Court of Sport Arbitration, and they turned him away. And in fact, after that article, they announced that he's actually under investigation again by FIFA. I don't know if you're probably aware of that, obviously, which I assume is actually in relation to the Legends Dinner story and the contract that was offered to his son. So, yes, no, he continues, but I guess they'll catch up with him again.
All right, let me take the moderator's prerogative, since everyone was so great to give me time to ask a question. And I'll ask Dick Pound a question. If you take a look at the Sports Governance Observer, what we heard from Jens in his talk, the question is the IOC doing enough as in its role as sitting as the supreme body? And if it's not, what might it or should it be doing differently than it's doing now?
A good question. I think we're doing more than we ever used to, and the only reason that we're able to do that is that we give out a ton of money following each Olympic Games to the participating international federations. If we had no money, you can be sure that not a single international federation would pay the slightest attention to the IOC. We're an irritant. That said, I think we've taken the first steps to try to get some level of compliance from the international federations by, at this point, getting them to self-report as a semi-condition of getting their television money. I can see that evolving into a more robust consideration of the governance principles. I think one of the things that comes out of the review that we just heard about is a lot of these organizations who have not considered these issues could probably use some help with model forms of, what does an ethics committee look like? What powers should it have? How do you make sure it's independent? Do you have outside members? What are the investigative powers and so forth that are available to them? So I think if you start saying self-report on this, but here are model guidelines, and you should be generally aware that we'll be looking at your self-report against what we think are minimum standards.
All right, thank you. Before I turn it over to Jens, who has some practical guidance for us, please join me in thanking the speakers and the panelists for this first session.
Yes, and not only do I have practical remarks, I also have warm thanks for everybody who contributed to make this a very, very intense and information-dense afternoon, right in the spirit of play the game, except that we are also committed to what we are speaking about, that we forget to leave enough time for debate. That I must apologize for. I'm sure we will compensate over the coming days. But there was one question I would like to comment, because there was this question about why FBI now and why not before. And that reminded me there is one person here who for the first time since 1997 is not speaking at a Play the Game conference, and that is Andrew Jennings. And that is the downside of the FIFA trouble. FIFA simply make it very, very difficult for us to occupy people's time, because everybody is speaking FIFA now, and Andrew Jennings is doing a fantastic work. He's right now working intensely over the past 4 months and still working with the BBC, and they are producing a new Panorama investigative program. It was, to my understanding, very much the books and reports by Andrew Jennings who inspired some FBI agents this time to start, and this means that this lonely, arduous, long-time work of being an investigative journalist, where you really are not very well financially rewarded, but you are rewarded with a lot of criticism and scorn from your colleagues, and probably from your family too. This long, hard effort sometimes about debates like today. So I would like to pay my respect to Andrew on that occasion. Now it is then time to say, for those of you who came just because this was a public session, who came from the Aarhus or wherever you came from, thanks a lot for joining in this public session. Now we will close the conference to the public, but against a small fee, not in brown envelopes, but regularly paid. It is actually possible to get entrance also in the days to come. To those of you who follow us on the internet, we will be back at 7:30, more or less sharp, hopefully more sharp. And then to all our delegates and guests, invited guests, who are now longing to get something to eat, we are going to have dinner in the concert hall of Aarhus, Musikhuset, which is just on the other side of the lawn there. You have to go out the main entrance and in that direction. It's a nice wide building. You will not miss it. And there are people with special diets. Everybody will find a plate already served. Except people with for special diet, they should find a seat where there is no plate, and then they will be attended by a waiter. See which privilege you can have out of having special diets, huh? The rest, or everybody, must also be ready to queue up in the bar, because there will be one item, beer, glass of wine, soda water, per person. If you wish any more, which you may not, because you are maybe exposed to some anti-doping personnel in the evening debate, but then you will have to buy it yourself. We look forward to this evening's very interesting doping debate. Thank you for coming, and now it's time for dinner. It's served already. Thank you.